and officially welcome you to week 5 of Design Thinking for Business. Almost halfway. For those of you who don't realise, you have a week off between week 6 and week 7, which is sort of a week to catch up, a week to go away and enjoy yourselves. I don't know, a week for me to catch up maybe. We'll see how we go. So that'll be coming next week. Because we're almost halfway, you'll see in the chat, and I've also will circulate it when I circulate the recording of this video, that I'm circulating a Google form. I'm spending a lot of my time, not today, it was somewhere else, but spending a lot of my time giving you feedback, and so now I'm asking you for some feedback for me. This is completely for me, it's unofficial feedback, but you'll find that a lot of the classes, we're actually encouraged to collect it before the formal surveys are done. And so you know, there are some really important formal surveys that are done. Sometimes they're done by OUA, sometimes they're done directly by RMIT. Marianne knows because she helped me try and get hold of some of it. It can be really hard for us as teachers to actually get the results of those surveys, but for you guys, they're really important to do, because I guess the way that I think about it is my bosses really, their only experience of what happens in the classrooms, this virtual classroom, the face-to-face classrooms I teach in, is what they get told by students. If people are really terrible, they find out pretty quickly, because students will get off their backsides and complain. And very few of us are really terrible, but sometimes we're just okay, or there are things that we can do that really would improve your experience. And again, as a design thinker, I'm constantly trying to put myself into your shoes as I do this job, but it's not easy to do. And sometimes there are really obvious things, particularly as we can't see the same systems that you see, that if we knew about them, we could fix them really quickly. So I ask the same questions every time, and I ask you to give me some constructive feedback, similar to the kind of feedback you'd probably like to get for yourself. It's lovely when people say you're doing an awesome job, but it's better if they actually articulate what's working for them and what they think is awesome. And so, for example, if you think it's awesome that this course is really slack and you don't have enough to do, it's probably good for me to know that, because I will probably ignore that kind of feedback and the other thing I do, which I'm not sure that many people do, but in a week's time, provided I've got some feedback, I'll share it back with you. I'll aggregate it and say, this is what people said. So my questions are effectively, what am I doing now that helps you learn, that I'm doing a lot of and I should just keep doing? What am I doing a little bit of that helps you learn and that you would appreciate me doing more of? What am I doing a little bit that you would really rather I didn't do at all because it distracts you? This probably. And what am I doing a lot of that are really pissing you off and taking you away from learning and you'd like me to stop altogether? Doesn't necessarily mean that I will do what you say, by the way, but it does give me an opportunity to explain why I am doing or not doing the thing that is annoying you. So if you could do that for me, that would be awesome. If it takes you more than 5 minutes, I would be surprised. You don't have to answer any of the questions, and it is completely anonymous.
That's good.
And only I will see it.
Delicious.
Somebody needs to mute as they're having a conversation with somebody else in space. All right, so today we are going to talk about the C word. We're going to talk about creativity. Let me just find my desktop and share a screen with you. I'm not sure why, but I can see Nicole. So basically, we want to talk about creativity. For some people, this is going to be their favorite week. For some people, this is going to be the most hair-raising, out of your comfort zone week, particularly if you do it properly. It's a relatively light-on week in terms of number of deliverables, but my expectation is that you will, even though the deliverables are small, and in fact, you know, one of them, it's like a maximum 100 words, I'm expecting that you will put the same level of care and thought into it as you do with the other weekly deliverables. So, like I said, we're talking about creativity. I'm assuming you can't see other crappy things that are sitting on my slide, on my screen. Please tell me if, yeah, I think I've just got, cool. So, what are we doing today? I want to talk about the activities, as we normally do. I want to talk about what creativity is, where it comes from. I want to do a bit of myth busting around creative thinking, creative process, and hopefully pull it all together by identifying why it's important, and why you as business people need to be thinking about creativity. By the way, I don't expect to convince all of you that creativity is important, and it's perfectly okay if I don't. But what I want to be able to do is convince you that it's important to have the conversation, and that there will be some of you who will be working with very creative people, and that you will be wanting to harness the skills and the attitudes that they bring. So even if you don't naturally fit into that slot, you need to be able to, well, I think, be able to talk to them so they'll listen to you, and listen to them so they'll talk to you. And conversely, for the people who are, and there are a number of you in this group who are really, really comfortable with your creative sides, you need to be able to push into that other space and be able to articulate in a way that the classic left brain thinkers, right brain thinkers, I should say, I always get that back to front. The right brain thinkers can listen to you and that you can talk to them. So let's proceed on this basis. So this week, what I need is a picture, a photo of something that you consider to be creative. You need to upload that image and explain it. Many of you have already done that. In theory, I don't know if the practice is going to work. When all of those are uploaded, each of you will be randomly allocated somebody in the group, and you're going to be asked to have a yes and conversation with that person. So we started to talk about this a little bit last week, the idea of a conversation or a format for a conversation where your job is to expand on the ideas or the creativity of that other person. So even if you think it's the most ridiculous thing that you have ever seen, you need to be able to really reflect on what the person has offered and expand, starting with the format yes and. So not yes but, not yeah, I can sort of see where you're coming from, but have you thought about this? Actually completely embracing their view as to what a creative thing is and moving on from that. The big one this week is actually, I want you to be creative about your creative fears. All, not all, but many of the readings this week are around creative confidence. In particular, probably my favourite, it's not really a reading, there's a video presentation from a guy called David Kelly, who is one of the founders of IDEO, the organisation or the consulting firm that is best known for its contribution to design thinking. And many of you will have seen the IDEO model as you've been working through and looking at design thinking. It's the one that has the hexagons. And if any of you are really interested, particularly in this topic, I would highly recommend the book that David and his brother Tim Kelly is actually works at Ogilvy, the advertising agency, that they've written about creativity. and harnessing creativity in the workplace. It's a good read. It's an easy read for an academic type or a business book, but I found it just helped me think about things in a completely different way. I don't believe that we have it online in the library though, so that's why I haven't prescribed any readings from it. But it's pretty easy to get on Kindle or as a text if you're interested and you're prepared to borrow hard copy books. So with this, what I want you to do is think about creativity and think about what's hard and what's scary for you about being creative. And I want you to visualize, create some sort of visualization that explains that to me. I want 0 word count. So some people cheat by putting words in their comic strip or something like that. I think it's cheating. I think you can visualize creativity in a way that I understand what your issue is. That one, by the way, doesn't get shared with everybody, just gets shared with me. And then, of course, there's some reading. So compared to last week, which I know broke a few of you, it'll feel like a really light on week, but I want some quality and depth in your thinking this time around. Of course, then you have your group activities. Now, most of the groups, it seems to me, are working well. They're at least talking to each other. There are a couple where there have been late arrivals in the group. It's difficult. If you are having problems that you think I can help you with, please reach out and I will try. Groups where there is a person who they still haven't heard from, even if I've heard from them, and even if you're in the room right now and you haven't made contact with the rest of your group, I am saying to those groups, proceed on the basis that person who has not checked in with you yet is no longer in the course. And if they decide to join your group later, we'll work out what to do then, because it's just not fair for the groups to keep waiting at this stage. It's the responsibility of the students to communicate. Of course, if you as a group have gone off on a tangent and you're not checking in for the ways that your missing member might have been able to contact you, I won't be happy about that either, but we're going to get there. One of the things I will be doing, I will set up a way to do it in the next couple of days, is I would like to have a little Zoom meeting like this with each group, just me and your group, sometime between now and the end of the mid-semester break. I didn't do that last semester, and I didn't learn about problems that groups were having until the very end, when some people were really quite furious about it. And I can't help problems that I don't know about. And sometimes members of groups can't do anything about issues that they're not aware of either. So I'd like to just check in with each group, ask you a few questions, find out what's going on, and give you all an opportunity to reset at that stage. When you submit group work, I want the names of the people who contributed too. So if there is somebody in your group who hasn't contributed, I want the submission to make that clear, and then I can follow it up. And if you're that person who other people are saying aren't contributing, I want you to tell me why that's not true as well, if that's the case. I'd just rather get it sorted sooner rather than later. My understanding is this is probably affecting 3 groups at the moment. If there are more than that, I'd like to know. Hopefully that's the case, and that means that we've got in the order of 12 groups where things are going swimmingly, or at least as well as you can expect, given how many people you've got or who's dropped out or whatever else is going on. So your activity this week, the design brief. This is one of the project management aids, and the idea is for it to be brief, it's given that name for a reason, and to identify as many of these things as you can. I've shared a couple of good examples. This is basically your North Star for your project. So at this stage, you've been through the what is, you've collected data, individually. You've had the opportunity to talk to each other about it. If you haven't done that, that's what group meetings are for when you do them. And so you've started to do, or you should have technically finished, given where we're at, the what is stage. So you've started an exploration of where your problem fits. And really, you've not been given a problem, right? You've been given a theme to work with. So as a group, you're going to pick the most interesting problem you think you have that you're going to try and design for. So the problem or the opportunity. And so a few clear sentences, like an elevator pitch for what you see the problem as being. Think about what resources you've got and then decide, well, what do you want to have in or out of scope? So what is your intent? Are you solving this problem for the world? Are you going to be in a particular city? Are you going to be in a particular neighbourhood? Is this something that you're doing for government, or are you doing it for Keolis Downer, or are you going to work for somebody else entirely? I think probably one of the most interesting parts of this experience is looking at those exploration questions. So really getting, as a group, an agreement around the kind of questions, the research you're going to need to do to really answer the questions. So they might be around the customer needs. They might be around understanding the technology better, where the gaps are with the technology. You know, some of you will feel a lot more comfortable thinking about batteries and storage and where devices might be parked and those kind of things, where a lot of other people will feel much more comfortable thinking about how might autonomous vehicles or public transport address that final mile solution for the elderly or for disabled people or for school children. Or again, I don't want to limit you. I want you to think about where that fits. So your exploration questions and your target users will be quite closely linked. Again, think about the resources you have. A group of 2 people, and I think there's at least one that's down to 2 people now, is going to be able to do a great deal less than a group of 5 people. So think about what your resources are and think about what your research plan will be. How much in the field research you're going to do, which of the design thinking tools that you've seen so far might you deploy to do that? Who is it that you actually need to understand? Will it just be one persona that you've adopted, or will it be a much broader thing than that? What is your expected outcome? What does success look like? What would you like to see? So your expected outcome, are you already heading down into a direction that you're expecting that there'll be a technology outcome, or will it be a solution, or will it be a pitch, or what is it that you're expecting your end result to be? What does success look like, and how will you measure whether you've become successful or not? And then ultimately some project planning. But I want you to do this for your group, for your project. So don't pretend you're a consulting company and that you can throw $7 million at it and you're going to go and outsource part of it to McKinsey, or get a research team from the blockchain center at RMIT. I want to know what you're going to do with the resources that you have. And resources include time. Resources include the amount of energy that you have to do this and where you're coming from. By the way, this is ginger beer. Oh, I've got water on my desk too, good. So have I got any questions, concerns, thoughts, frustrations, comments on this particular assignment? There were a few questions coming through already this week, and it's one of the reasons I shared the examples. Come to me if you've got questions along the way. Don't be shy about that. And probably the biggest piece of advice I have is don't overthink it. Oh, Marianne, I can see you now.
Hi, Kath. So
Hi.
I'm not quite sure. Do you want us to do several design briefs about different things? Just one?
One, for your whole team. I don't want you to do it all by yourself. I want your team to agree one.
No,
and it's kind of scoping out your project as a team.
No, I've got a great team. We'll do it all together.
That's what I like to hear.
What about success metrics? Like, how do you prove that it's worked or it hasn't worked when dealing with a hypothetical problem and solution?
Well, I think your success metric will depend on your project, clearly. But it might be that at this stage, you don't actually know what your solution is going to be. So once you're looking at your problem, you might say that a success metric might be at least 5 solid ideas that are worth prototyping and the completion of 1 prototype for discussion at the when we provide our presentation. Or so the success metrics might be that something around finding a solution that 3 in 5 targeters consider the idea to be worth exploring or acceptable to them. They're going to need to be quite loose at this stage. For some of you, it might be as simple as a success metric is we pass the assignment and Kath doesn't laugh out loud at us. Actually, I laugh out loud with any of you any day. But yeah, I think partly sometimes we just try and make these we pretend too much. So your success metric might even be we get the deliverables done on time, that we don't actually reduce anybody to tears. We come out laughing at the end. We still talk to each other when this is over. Have a look and work out what is actually going to work for you and be realistic. And have a look at some of the examples that were in there in the samples that I gave you as well.
Just another question.
Sure.
With a prototype, can it be an illustration or does it have to be?
Yeah, we will actually, you'll have some prototyping exercises. So you'll see now that a lot of your deliverables now, actually, particularly from next week onwards, will feed into the assignments. So even your individual ones or otherwise. Now with prototyping, we will talk a bit like the difference between the low fidelity and high fidelity prototypes. Given the resource constraints that we have with people in different cities in different places, you're going to need to have some kind of low fidelity prototype. Now, whether that is, mapping out pictures on a page of what something might look like with a view to then talking to people about what their experiences might be, whether it might be some sort of role playing that you do. We'll talk about the different options there, but clearly you are not going to have to mock up a software package and write some basic code. I'm not expecting any sort of, egg carton and milk bottle pipe cleaner battery storage solutions. Well, not delivered into my inbox at the university anyway. If you make those and take photos, that's awesome. But yeah, we'll talk about different ways of doing that.
Great.
It's a shame because teaching it face-to-face, one of my favourite parts of an intensive is just coming into a room with all sorts of craft equipment and just saying, go for it. And it's so interesting to see what people come up with. It was the first time I ever taught it, the industry problem was around getting more customers to come into cinemas. And one group basically prototyped this thing. So they were thinking about, in an aeroplane, you've got your movie screen and then your little tray.
Yeah.
And they were imagining a world where you could go to the movies and there was the tray table came down in front of you, but you could have your champagne and your dinner and all the rest of it. And then you could watch the movie on the big screen. But then so they prototyped out this beautiful tray table out of cardboard and pipe cleaners and all the rest of it. And of course, as soon as they demonstrated it, they realised as soon as the person in front of them leant their seat back, everything just went insane. It just didn't work. And it was, on paper, it just looked fabulous. But it was just great. It was so much fun. Anyway.
Thank you.
So, creativity. What can you see on the slide? You've only got half the picture, and our brains tend to fill in the things that we don't expect. And yet things aren't always what we see. And creativity is to a large extent around letting our brains fill in the picture in a different way, in a new or a novel way. So let's have a little chat about what creativity is. I mean, that is, in a sense, what the first exercise is asking you to do, is to share what creativity is to you and what you understand creativity to be. Got pictures of two dudes on the slide. Anybody got a view as to which one of these two is likely to be more creative? I should have whacked up a quick poll. Wave your hands in the air if you think it's the guy with the beard. Wave your hand in the air if you think it's the guy who looks like he sells toothpaste with his smile. Put both hands in the air if you think I've got absolutely no idea at all. The reality is we do have preconceptions about whether people are creative or not. We have a sense that if you present as a business person, if you present in a conservative way, that you are not creative, or it's not within your expectation to present yourself as a creative person. What I find kind of amusing about this, I've got a very big screen in front of me, as you can probably tell by the glow of the colour on my face as the slides change. But it's quite clear on the big screen that our dude with the sleeves, like they're literally sleeves, like this is an affectation that is not actually ink on his arms. And, you know, to me, I look at it and think, you know, he's trying to portray a particular look. And it probably is a creative look within a sense of confines. But how people look, how people present themselves doesn't really give us any insight into their ability to solve problems or their ability to create new ideas or otherwise. It might, they might be entirely consistent, but creativity is a verb, it's an activity. It's not a state of mind or a state of being as much as an action of being. Or is creativity just looking at things sideways? Is it just something from the arts? This is a piece, I think it's from the Tate. Unfortunately, I very badly not actually credited it, but this hamburger sideways on the wall is just looking at something in a sideways or in a different way, making it bigger, making it smaller. Is that creative? And is it only for the arts? Does anybody have any comment? I'll take that as a no. So Sir Ken Robinson, who many of you may have heard of, he writes a lot about education and in particular the importance of arts in the education. And many of you will have followed the discussions about the need for STEM education, so science, technology, engineering and maths. And I'm a big fan of STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts and maths. I think that some of the greatest engineers and scientists that we can think of needed to have creativity in order to apply their STEM skills into solving problems. I mean, the person who is most well known for his creative thinking and his use of visualization in relation to solving very extreme physics problems, for want of a better word, is Einstein. Any of you who have read anything about Einstein will know that he explained both the problems and the theories that he was solving using visualization techniques So, for example, he talks about whether somebody ages or doesn't age if they travel at the speed of light. And he uses this analogy of, to explain space-time by thinking and visualizing what actually traveling at the speed of light would look like and how that would work. Or even just that, you know, many of you would have done this in year 10 physics at school, that exercise of getting on a train and jumping in a carriage and landing at the same spot on the carriage floor, even though the train has travelled several metres while you've been up in the air. Being able to visualise and explain those problems meant that one of the greatest physicists of our time could be understood in a more general sense. So Sir Ken Robinson writes a lot about education and the importance of STEM, talks about creativity in the sense of having these three attributes. Creativity starts with imagination, the act of thinking, but ultimately requires some sort of action, the act of creating, and in doing so creates value. And we call that innovation. The creation of something new that adds value, whether that is to the world at large by the creation of something beautiful, whether that's something we listen to, something that we see, or in the context we're probably more interested in it here, the act of solving a problem or creating a better mousetrap, a quicker way to do something. And Robinson basically says that it is this ability to create, to imagine the world different, and to do something about that, that separates humans from animals and perhaps from machines. And for those of you who are interested in artificial intelligence, and I'm aware of the Turing test, so this idea that we reach the singularity when a machine can fool us into thinking it's human. It's very much bound up into this idea of the ability to come up with something novel, to imagine and to be able to articulate an imagined world. So Arthur Koestler comes up with this definition. The creativity is really around juxtaposing different perspectives and ways of thinking, so to create something new by blending two different fields of knowledge. And I think as we work through innovation, you'll see a number of the tools that I'm going to suggest that you use when you're thinking about or ideating, is the term that we use, to create solutions for your problem, your what ifs, will be around matching things that you might not have thought to put together before. Anybody recognize this guy? And it's not Marcel Marceau. Marianne, are you waving there? Do you know who it is? Nope, she doesn't.
It's Picasso.
It is Picasso. Thank you, Erin. So basically, he was a painter, but he was also a person who was really, really interested in the arts. Actually, I don't have it in this pack. Usually what I do is I show one of Picasso's really early works, and if any of you get the chance to see them, they're more akin to a Rembrandt than they are to what we know. And this is, even if you're not a fan of modern art, this picture is one that you would probably recognise and be able to link to Picasso, even if you didn't know that it was called the Weeping Woman. And it's a juxtaposition, essentially, of different perspectives and different ways of thinking, very much influenced by this combination of his work as an artist, but his interest in masks. Similarly, if we think about a modern smartphone is also a device that is created by juxtaposing or bringing together different features from different things and melding them into the one place. and many would say more attractive than a Picasso, and equally expensive sometimes. Juxtaposition and creativity are really the juxtaposition of different ideas are really what underpins innovation or creativity in business. So here we have a video store and a postal service, and we end up with Netflix, or what Netflix was 2-3 innovations ago or iterations ago. Netflix started off by having this big back catalogue of movies, and people, rather than have stores, what you did is you went and ordered a particular DVD. And one of the things I noticed really early on as they're battling in this really saturated market was they would basically do surveys and get responses back whether people liked the movie or didn't like the movie. And at any given time, they've got hundreds of thousands of back issues of no longer prime release movies. So they took a punt and said, well, if you liked The Notebook, chances are you'll like Gone with the Wind. And so it didn't cost them any more to send 5 DVDs. And they used the data that they collected from people about what movies they liked to send them other movies that they might like instead, and created that subscription service that then molded into the online service and the streaming service, which then in turn became its own production service. And so their production is very much informed by the information that they get from their customers about what their customers' likes and dislikes are, similar to Amazon. But all of these things are basically creative problem solving based on the information that they have, the resources that they have, and then juxtaposing 2 different elements together. So what is creativity? Creativity beyond this problem-solving idea. What's going to be really frustrating for many of you is that there isn't actually an agreed definition amongst academics of what creativity is, which is kind of ridiculous because I suspect all of us know and recognize creativity when we see it. We might not agree on the value of the creative work. So all of us have different tastes in music, for example, but most of us, I think, would think that the act of being able to create music is an inherently creative act. That it requires a set of skills and a set of an imagination and problem solving that not all of us carry around with us. So back in 1953, Stein came up with this conclusion, and I'll quote directly: the creative work is a novel work that is accepted as tenable or useful by satisfying a group in some point in time. And by saying that the work, as in the output, is the focus, and by focusing on the novelty, he says that the work is original. It didn't exist before, but some of the elements might have existed in some way. So ultimately, under Stein's definition, the degree of novelty is how far the work diverges from the status quo. The further it diverges, the more creative it is. Again, this is probably where I'm more of a pracademic than an academic. I don't know that it really matters that we have or don't have a consistent understanding of what creativity is. In a business context for you, and even in our larger life context, I think we understand that the benefits of creativity are in solving a problem. And that creativity is something that's different from design, but incorporated into design. And creativity is ultimately a practical application of putting our imaginations to work. And it's something that ultimately makes us human. I like this definition from Bruce Haddon probably best of all. The key to creativity is sustaining that childlike free-form imagination while enriching it with knowledge rather than replacing it with knowledge. And I think this is something that can be quite scary for people as you think about creativity and what frightens you about being challenged to use your creativity, particularly in a group or a work setting, is that nobody ever got sacked for buying IBM. Well, it might now, but I think you understand what I mean. That it's very easy to know whether you're right or wrong with a black and white answer, to solve a problem, to write some code, to calculate the numbers. It's very difficult to know whether there is any chance of ever being right or wrong when you are ideating, when you're just coming up with an idea. You can certainly find ways to test it, but ideas are, I don't know, they're very fragile things when they're first created. And to a certain extent, we need to protect them from challenge, from being replaced with knowledge, from being assessed at too great a length until they've had some chance to be nurtured, to have some yes and conversations for them to grow. So everybody's favourite creative thinker, I think he's almost become a meme for creativity, which is interesting, isn't it? Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And this is ultimately what design thinking goes to, that what we really need to do is understand the problem with a view to ensuring that the solution we design is designed for the problem. So what does it take to be creative? Four things here. They come from Richard Foster. Curiosity, associative ability, the ability to connect otherwise disconnected things, energy and motivation. Anything that you'd add to that list?
I'd go with time.
Time. I think time's really important. I have a slide, in fact, the next one. The thing with creativity is you can't always just turn it on or off. How long is a piece of string? How long is it going to take you to solve that problem? How much do you need to have the problem or the idea percolating around in what I like to call the thinking music part of your brain? It's not always immediate. What the research shows us is there's only one real indicator of whether somebody's going to have a good idea or not. And by good idea in this context, it could be a creative idea or a creative solution. Basically, the only indicator of whether you're going to have a good idea or not is how many ideas you have. The more ideas you have, the more likely you are to have a good one. Which would suggest that it's very rarely that the first solution that you come up with is going to be the best solution. And the problem is sometimes we only ever need one solution to our problems at a time. And all of us have worked in environments where things are complex and difficult, and in part that's because there's a whole lot of different solutions that are kind of cobbled together, as opposed to looking at the problem as a whole and coming up with one cohesive solution. Things have been solved on the go. And often we just go with the best solution at the time is the first solution that we have. Have any of you ever watched a small child trying to open a box or get out of a car seat or some sort of restraint or go into a space that they're not allowed to go? I find it fascinating watching kids do that because they never try the same thing twice. They just keep doing all sorts of different things. Where me, again, my computer doesn't work. I do the same things over and over again. They usually involve moving my mouse rapidly and saying words that I'm not allowed to say in front of students. And then maybe turning it on and off again. I do the same things over and over and over again, even though they clearly don't work. So sometimes that time piece is actually what we need to take a deep breath, get ourselves into the right zone, and to be able to be both motivated and have the right kind of energy. I think a safe space for solving problems is also really important. You guys are going to be working in your teams. Many of you will not have met each other in person. And it can be, you can feel quite vulnerable throwing an idea out there. Have you ever watched like a Monty Python or some sort of ridiculous comedy and thought, I wonder who actually threw that idea out onto the table in the first time? You know, like, can you imagine the Monty Python boys all sitting around and somebody says, why don't we have some knights that go knee? Like, it's ridiculous, right? I just laugh at the thought of it. Turns out it's like, I clearly can't do the voices. It's very funny when you see it for the first time. In fact, some people can watch it, members of my family can watch that over and over again, you know, like, oh, it's just a flesh wound. Like, it's ridiculous. But imagine the vulnerability and the trust that it took to throw a ridiculous idea like that out on the table. Imagine the trust that it takes to say, how about we do something like the Bible stories, but we'll make it about Brian? Like, the level of trust that people come up with to do that, I just find that really, really fascinating. And I wonder, how do we reproduce that? How do we make a workspace or a study space safe enough that people can put out a ridiculous idea and you can have the yes and conversation to bring it into a successful idea? And that's your challenge.
I think one of the biggest constraints that I feel like is faced, especially in the workplace, is that to be creative, you need the time and the space to be able to explore the possibilities around ideas. Maybe some of them won't even work, but so often we're restrained to these expectations that we need to find the right answer straight away.
Yeah, yeah. And there, I won't pretend that every workspace will be open to failure, to testing. You know, despite the mantra, fail early, fail often, start again. Often what we see in projects is that, I call it deal fatigue, that, or, you know, it's this bias that, well, we've put our eggs into this basket now. One of the professors that I had in my MBA, who was a decision scientist, so he's completely analytical, he used to talk about it this way. He'd talk about diversity. So, and how in investment portfolios, actually, particularly if we're taking on high risk investment, what we want to do is have a portfolio of 20 investments where our expectation is that 19 of them will fail and one of them will do well enough to cover all of that damage. That if we put all of our eggs into one high risk, you know, maybe we'll get it all back, but actually we won't. At the end of the day, it's, you know, if it's got a 1 in 20 chance of succeeding, then really we need to have 20 investments or 40 investments. And the analogy that he uses, though, is he says, well, what happens is people say you're a bad, you know, you're a bad employee or you've made bad choices if your projects fail. But then you think about it, he says, you know, think about it when a baby's born, and this is Zager de Grave, so I need to credit him with the analogy and let you know it's not mine. But he says when a baby's born, you know, if you actually think about what it takes for a baby to be born, everybody's really happy about that baby that's born. They're all saying how beautiful it is. Nobody's there saying, think of all those millions of wasted sperm that never hit an egg, that never made this baby. And maybe business needs to focus more on the babies and less on the wasted sperm. So, ridiculous analogy, but I think it makes sense. Yeah, but back to what Emma was saying. Yeah, part of creating a creative team and nurturing a creative team is, as a leader and as a manager, finding ways to buffer them from the risks that come with failure, and being able to create an environment where it's okay to fail and that failing is actually learning opportunity. It helps us bring the creative output to the next stage. Now, clearly you can't just keep failing forever. You need to actually drill down and understand where your solution is taking you. And yeah, we will talk a little bit about time resources as we go as well. And most creative people actually, surprisingly, work quite well within a structure. That sometimes having the structure and the constraints of time and budget just provide a focus point for them to release that creativity and get the best outcome. But it is an ongoing conundrum for management, and team management in particular is, it's not just something you can do once and then get on with it. Culture is an ongoing process. And it's really amazing how negativity can spread like wildfire, or where positivity actually needs to be nurtured. And it's something as managers that you need to be constantly on the lookout for and thinking about ways to enhance and nurture creativity within the confines of a business structure. Not helpful, I know, but it's a good point to acknowledge. So creativity and where it comes from, design thinkers will argue that a big part or a big precondition to creativity is being able to diverge your thinking. And so this slide here comes from some work that's been done by my colleague Mark Boys, who co-taught this subject with me last time. And he's actually working on his PhD thesis at the moment on exactly this area. So he's actually doing it in project management of all things, but he's looking at the ways that creativity can be nurtured within a project management space for better outcomes. And so he argues that you need to have these building blocks in place, that supportive, safe environment, but then also divergent thinking. And divergent thinking comes from a range of different places, including diversification. So a diversity of life experience, a diversity of thinking styles. So I mentioned Lee Thompson's work last time, and so she's done a lot of looking at the diversity of thinking and the extent to which that can help nurture creativity. And it's interesting that her research shows that whilst gender diversity and ethnic diversity is quite useful, it's not really as meaningful in the long run as different thinking styles. So you get more valuable interaction, provided you don't get too much conflict, from mixing introverts and extroverts, from mixing people who are comfortable with visualization with people who are comfortable with the numbers. So getting a really different approaches to thinking through the same problems. So divergent thinking is a really big part of design thinking, and we talk about it a number of times, but it can be a little bit obscure as to what we mean. And really, let me go to the next slide. I think it'll show it here. Yeah. So divergent thinking is really about expanding your thinking as much as you can, getting a large range of different ideas based on some sort of stimuli. And then convergent thinking is then matching that with the evidence and bringing it into a point again. So this model, the double diamond model of design thinking, which you will have seen a couple of times, and here it's overlapped with the model that we're using as well. So the double diamond talks about discover, define, develop and deliver, as opposed to the model we're using, the what is, what if, what wows, what works. But as you can see, at each stage of the thinking, we're diverging out at the what is stage. You've been doing that. You come back in and think about the what if. So you're going to start at your widest point and articulate what that means. And then you go out again as you think, as we go into the what wow. So we're really trying to push our brains out and then constrain them again. And it is that action of diverging and converging that helps us come up with a range and a creative solution. So, some myths about creativity. Oh, I'm going too slow. One of the things that you hear a lot is creativity is about that eureka moment, that suddenly, you know, there's nothing, and wow, big, fully formed, big, bright idea. In fact, most good ideas are co-created. They're built upon, they take time to incubate. Emma mentioned before time. Often somebody knocking at the door saying, what are you going to do, what are you going to do, is exactly the thing that dampens creativity. Creativity is about hard work. You know what they say, the harder I work, the luckier I get. The harder you think, perhaps the more creative you get. I think there's also a myth that there are creative and non-creative types. Everybody has the ability to create. Some people are more comfortable with creativity than other people. Many adults are much less comfortable with creativity as adults than they were as children. And on that note, I would strongly recommend, if you haven't had a look at it, to look at that David Kelly video that's part of the piece. It's called Touching the Snake. It sounds rude. It's really not. And I think it's a really interesting way to think about creative confidence and to think about your own innate creativity, particularly if you don't naturally think of yourself as being a creative type. Very few truly creative ideas are absolutely original. Often creativity is about combining ideas. You'll hear Apple and Microsoft argue about who invented the PC. In fact, probably the inventor of the PC was Xerox at the beginning. Ultimately, technologies evolve and then are applied in ways that create new and interesting applications. There's also a myth that you need to be an expert in order to solve a problem. The truth is that people who are not experts can provide the most valuable insights. And I think there's a bit of this is kind of a Western bias in many ways, that we need to apply the person with the science or get the person with the numbers to come in and solve the problem, where often it is the people who are experiencing the problems who have the greatest insights that will help us solve what they are. Traditionally, we commission work to be done, and there is this sort of idea that the more you pay, the more creative the solution will be. But there's no real direct link between reward and creativity itself. More money doesn't usually relate to more creative. It might mean that the end result is more valued in some way, or there might be more funds available to protect the intellectual property. But the creativity, the creative value, the innovative value itself is very, very rarely linked to how much money is spent. This is interesting. There are two ways of looking at this. So the Burker says that it is a myth that there is the lone creator. Lee Thompson, on the other hand, will say actually most of the best creative work will be done by one or two people alone rather than a large team. Creativity can come from soloists, but it can also come from groups. It can come from co-creation. And often that yes and conversation can stretch a creative idea so much further. And I think creativity is a team sport. I think it can be very lonely otherwise. The formula in organisations for creating solutions is often brainstorming, but there are many, many other tools that you can use as well. Brainstorming is a really good start. When it's done in a really noisy way, then we tend to have the hippos winning. So everybody heard the acronym HIPPO, highest paid person in the office. Anybody tried to do some kind of brainstorming or creative work with their boss in the room? Often goes very quickly to what the boss clearly thinks is a good idea. Often being able to get the best out of brainstorming is around, and you guys are so well placed to do what we call cyber storming here, is about doing the brainstorming in total silence and then bringing the ideas together and seeing ways that you can combine and add from them. There's also a kind of myth that if there's a cohesive team, we are more likely to get an outcome. And look, and it's clear that when the teams that look alike work in the same way are less likely to have conflict, but it's not necessarily true that they're less likely or more likely to have a creative output. To a certain extent, you do need some tension, as long as it's respectful tension, in order to get a creative output. I think there's a lot of expectation that the most creative workforces, you know, the Googles or the Airbnbs, it's all foosball tables and trophies and relaxed dress code and too much caffeine. But those things themselves have not been shown to actually enhance the creativity of the organisation. And in fact, too much cohesion can actually hinder creativity and lead to groupthink. Constraints, which I mentioned earlier, while being free to explore and unbind workers, it actually turns out that a lack of resources is often really the fuel for creativity. That many artists, many musicians thrive on having a structure. Any of you who take the time to, you know, do a Google around creativity and delve into creative process for writers or musicians will find so many different blogs about the slog, about meeting those deadlines of 1,000 words a day or 100 words a day or whatever it is, that again, the science shows that the most prolific are the ones who are most likely to come up with the good content. So there is also the mousetrap myth. If you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. Well, the reality is the mousetrap as it is possibly good enough, but it's not enough to have an absolutely fabulous idea. You also need a need for that idea or a desire for that idea. Getting new products into the market is a really tough gig, but often the most successful ones are the ones that created a new niche or a new market. Nobody knew we needed a smartphone 15 years ago. Now we can't. Well, I can't imagine life without it. So this data here, and I'm really coming to the end of my point here, is, well, why do we need creativity? The reality is that creativity is becoming more and more important. And as I would argue that as we see an increase in the use of artificial intelligence, in automation in jobs, it is more and more important that the workforce of the future can differentiate themselves from the robots. So this data from the World Economic Forum, the top 10 skills that were required in the workplace in 2015, creativity was 10th on that list. Their prediction for 2020 is it will be 3rd on that list. Complex problem solving will continue to be number 1. Critical thinking will bump up to number 2. And the list is quite different. You'll also notice that emotional intelligence is on the list and isn't even on the list for 2015. So have a look at that data. I find it really interesting. And that, my friends, is really all that I have to say about this fascinating topic. Let me bring you all up so I can see you. Stop share, there we go. I have one, oh, not that bad. I did race a bit at the end, but we're a couple of minutes over time. Questions, concern, Jordan, I can see you've made a comment there. I've got to look through the bottom of my glasses, excuse me for showing you one of my several chins. Oh, sorry, I'm reading out loud. Mocking is not good. And actually, that's one of the benefits of doing a cyberstorm. Turn off the audio, do it in complete silence, and then share the post-it notes on a screen together at the end, because at the end of the day, people really need to be able to create an environment of trust. And as you said at the end, needless to say, their supply chain was never improved. Yeah, I've got to say, there's a big part of me that I just don't get the mocking. And other than the fact that it's kind of my default mechanism is to try and laugh at myself and at others. At the same time, I don't see what having a go at somebody else's idea will achieve. Now, I do understand that ideas need to be tested, and in fact, that's going to be a really important process. And in every group, it's a really good idea to have somebody who's going to play the devil's advocate, who's going to actually look at all of the negatives as soon as possible. It's a really good technique for testing your ideas. But again, thinking of ideas as, you know, our tiny little hatchlings, our little birds, they need to be nurtured first and explored and given enough positivity to get strong enough to stand on their own. And then you can work out whether or not you're going to continue to feed them and let them fly free or not. But sometimes you just need to give them enough space to grow. And particularly, it's interesting, the introverts often have better ideas in this sense because they don't share their ideas until they're comfortable with them. Where extroverts like me will have the germ of an idea and put it out there and it won't be well formed enough. And so people will shoot it down really quickly. So again, we often think this is a problem with brainstorming. The extroverts are all there being loud and all the rest of it, and the introverts are like, oh, that doesn't make any sense to me. Oh, I've got an idea, but no, oh, it's even more wacky than this, what these other people are thinking. And it might be 6 weeks later that it's all fully formed in their brain, but it hasn't been shared with anybody else. So finding that way to get everybody to share, but then to have those yes and conversations to nurture the ideas before, and then also when you nurture them in a group, they cease being that one person's idea and become our idea. And then we can all battle with them a little bit and make them stronger. Questions, concerns, thoughts? Are we feeling confident that we can get through this week? Time-wise, I think it's a good week for you guys. And then we take from here, we go into the ideation stage. So you start germinating even more ideas. Marianne, what were you about to say?
I didn't mean to interrupt. I was going to say we've tried everything to change our CLN4 into the name of our group, and we can't seem to be able to do it.
Just send me your name and I'll change it. I can't remember how, but I think the person who is the admin or who's been appointed leader can probably do it. And I think if you go, my memory is, but the problem is it looks different on my page. If you go into the people area and then you go to groups and you can see the groups, if you click on the little ellipse next to your group, one of the options is edit. And I think you can change the name there.
Thanks, Kath.
If that doesn't work, send me the name and I'll change it because I know I can do it myself easily. But with stuff, if you're having problems with Canvas, the best thing is on the left-hand side of your screen, if you're using a computer screen, I have no idea what it's like on a phone or otherwise, there's a little blue question mark in a circle. click on that, a little menu comes out, and in that menu it says it's got a couple of things. One of them is a chat function and one of them is a helpline. Basically, you'll be talking to somebody who's in Utah who doesn't want to talk, who doesn't want to find out what's going on in Utah, right? They're 24/7. They're so helpful. I imagine every time that I'm talking to either Donnie or Marie Osmond, it makes me happy. I ask them ridiculous questions and they answer me. And they're there to serve. So,
Kath, and they were fantastic.
yeah. So anything like that, they don't mind. They don't charge by the hour like I do. I'll be sending you all a bill later. I wish. No, honestly, I cannot speak more highly of them. And if it turns out they can't help you with the problem, then that is a canvas issue, and then we fix it. And very occasionally, hopefully very occasionally, the problem that you're experiencing is because I have done something incorrectly. I don't do it on purpose, but it has happened. There have been little glitches, and then they tell me and I fix it. But usually that sort of stuff in particular, just go to Canvas, they're great. And like I said, imagine Donnie or Marie Osmond, it makes it so much more fun. I think is that racially stereotyping? Now I'm worried after bloody Fraser Anning today and just feeling sick about the world we live in. I really should not be doing that myself. Yeah, anyway. All right. Fly away, little children, if you have no more questions. I will be here same time next week. Then we all get a week off, except I will probably be trying to use this time to talk to your groups independently. Oh, Shahab, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about what is the really actual difference between creativity and innovation? Because I believe both of them are similar to each other.
Yeah, I think they are. Does anybody else want to have a go at thinking about creativity and innovation? What you see? I've made you all shy, I think. I don't know, talk too much and get in there. I think about, sorry, go on, Erin.
I think innovation is the outcome of creativity.
I think innovation is one of the outcomes of creativity. So creativity is a big, I think of it maybe as a Venn diagram here, that all innovations involve creativity, but not all creativity results in an innovation. So some creativity might be art for art's sake. Some creativity might not actually result in any outward product. Like those of you who have small children, when you make up a story for your kids to keep them entertained in the car or at night time or whatever, or for those of you who were small children fairly recently, those stories that you made up so that your mother didn't know what you were really doing, they're creative, right? That's creativity, but there's no long-term output. The world doesn't change. So all innovations involve creativity, but not all creative outputs are innovative or innovation. So the innovation is about the adding of the value. Again, it's a very academic approach, isn't it, to define things these days? And I think sometimes we can get so caught up in the definition, we can actually see it. We recognise it when we see it in the wild. All right, time to go. I'm hungry, I need to eat. So we'll talk to you all next week. Have a good week. Shout out if you need anything.